The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The North Kesteven series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to North Kesteven, everybody. I've got 7 left for you in this part of Lincolnshire, and by the end of this working week that'll be down to 2. Now, believe it or not, as well as some massive towns which remain in this district, there are some small villages as well, and this parish has got 2 of them. This is Ashby, LAUNDE and Bloxholm. Ashby, LAUNDE and Bloxholm, ash tree farm belonging to the LAUNDE family and Blox homestead. We have 7 left to cover in North Kesteven, and 5 of them will fall this week, leaving us with just 2. These 5 are the remaining villages. The other 2 are the only towns in the district. The first 2 of these 5 are among the smallest of this bit of Lincolnshire, but that doesn't mean they should be overlooked. Today we're in Ashby, LAUNDE and Bloxholm, which despite its small stature contains a population of almost 800 people. That's because the northernmost reaches of it cover half of RAF Digby and the houses that are tied to that. We've already been there, and if you want to learn a bit about the airbase, you need the Scotwick episode. Today we're only focusing on the tiny communities of Ashby and Bloxholm themselves, and they're very different. Both of them sit on a limestone formation known as the Cornbrash. Several limestone streams arise from this area and flow east. Ashby's main street has 3 main features, these being its church, an old hall, and the village hall. Bloxholm struggles to be defined as a village in the traditional sense. There's no main cluster, instead it's sporadically laid out around a few houses and farms, but it does include a church and an old hall of its own. Neither place has seen huge waves of residential development, and although they do possess some modern housing, they're still very much based around their older properties. This is, after all, a part of rural Lincolnshire that's generally been unspoilt for centuries. I say, long may that remain. Let's explore both of these and see what secrets they hold. Starting off our journey through Ashby, LAUNDE and Bloxholm, we have the latter, the tiny settlement of Bloxholm. This is situated approximately 1 mile southwest of Digby on a minor lane that can be seen from the B1198. Bloxholm used to be a parish in its own right until, in 1931, it was combined with Ashby to give us the modern boundaries. Its last recorded population was 79. There can't be many more than that who reside here today. Bloxholm is little more than a collection of houses, somewhat sporadically laid out along a collection of minor roads. There are 2 main landmarks here though. Bloxholm has a church dedicated to St Mary, and that can be found off a drive that leads to the other landmark, Bloxom Hall. St Mary's Church was built in around 1300, although nobody is totally sure of the exact date. Both arcades seem to date from that year or thereabouts. Unusually, its perpendicular tower is built into its nave, which makes it rather thin appearance-wise. The nicest features of the church are considered to be the alterations made in 1812. They were carried out by General Manners of Bloxom Hall. It was he who rebuilt the chancel and the porch here. His coat of arms is proudly displayed over the porch entrance today. It's made of Code stone and it's signed Code and Sealy 1813. Manners also gave the nave and the chancel their plaster rib vault. Yeah, apologies for the long shots, people, but there doesn't seem to be any way to access the churchyard. This track that I'm currently standing on is the one that leads up to Bloxom Hall, and I was expecting there to be like a little footpath across this field behind me to get to the church, but there isn't. So How you get to the churchyard here is well and truly beyond me, but at least I've covered it. At least I've covered it. Now, speaking of Bloxom Hall, that's next. So this is Bloxom Hall, a partially demolished early 18th century country house. The surviving north wing of the hall now serves as a farmhouse and it's Grade 2 listed. Bloxom Hall was built in 1707 for Septimus Cyprian Thornton. It was enlarged in 1772 by the addition of the north wing by the architect Lewis Valamy. The hall was to become the home of the Duchess of Rutland, from whom it descended to General Lord Robert Manners and his son George Manners. Manners Jr. was the High Sheriff of Lincolnshire for 1826. As well as making changes to the church, it was under his watch that the hall gained a stable block, which is also now Grade 2 listed. He died unmarried, leaving the estate to his great niece Mary, who married the MP and Privy Councillor Robert Nisbet Hamilton. When he died in 1887, the Ogilvy family took over because Hamilton's daughter Mary, who predeceased him, was married to Henry Ogilvy. The Ogilvys held many homes in Scotland, and Bloxham was somewhat surplus to requirements for them. As such, it was sold off. It was eventually abandoned in the 1940s, and the older main wing was demolished in 1963, leaving only the newer north wing still standing. So now let's drive to Ashby, and on the way let's discuss a bit of history about the place. Ashby de la Launde is a small village, but it's definitely larger than Bloxham. In the Domesday Book, the village was called Ashby, and it comprised 2 manors. These were in the possession of Ralph Paynell and Colsfine of Lincoln. A later lord of the manor, William de Ashby, founded the Knights Templar Preceptory at Temple Brewer in around 1150, and even joined the order himself. In time, the preceptory became the second wealthiest in Britain. Although linked to Ashby, it sits within its own parish, Temple Brewer with Temple High Grange, although the 2 civil entities do share the same parish council today. One of William's descendants, another William in fact, gave the Knights Templar the right to appoint a priest at Ashby's church, dedicated to St Hibald. In return, the Templars would provide a chaplain to perform services in a private chapel dedicated to St Margaret in the de Ashby's manor house. That house, which was built in 1220, was a rectangular 2-storied semi-fortified manor according to records, so it must have been quite the home given the time. In the 13th century, William's granddaughter, Cecilia, married Walter de la Launde. He was the lord of the manor of Laceby. Upon the death of her father, Jordan de Ashby, in 1260, Cecilia would inherit Ashby Manor, and that's when the settlement became known as Ashby de la Launde. The de la Launde family finally lost their land holdings in the area at some point in the mid-16th century, probably as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII. Okay, so here we are then in Ashby de la Launde, and it's a very linear village this. I'm just making my way to my start point. I've driven basically to my end point and heading back to where we will begin this walk, and this is not going to be the longest walk in the world. Ashby de la Launde is a very tiny village, but it does have a few little secrets to tell. Yes, this walk through Ashby won't take long. We already know about the de la Launde part of the name, but what about Ashby? Well, it possibly derives from the old Danish personal name, Aski. Alternatively, the meaning might be the farmstead village where ash trees grow, and the likelihood is that's probably the right one. So now you know a little bit more about Ashby and how it was formed and how its name came about. What does it have in terms of landmarks? Well, not much. Ashby village is a linear one, stretching for around a quarter or maybe a third of a mile along one main street between the B1198 and the B1191. A pleasant village, hidden away from the major thoroughfares, Ashby sits on a broken declivity 7 miles north of Sleaford. Contained within the modest chunk of land it occupies is a church, a village hall, a water tower and a 16th century former manor house that's had a lot happen to it over the years. This narrow lane off the main street leads to the church. It's known as Church Avenue and has a handful more houses on one side of the road only. Where these abruptly stop, you might think that's it as far as civilization goes, but keep going because you'll soon find yourself stood in the churchyard at St Hibbalds. St Hybalds Church is an ancient edifice of stone in the early English style, consisting of a chancel, a nave, a north porch and a plain embattled western tower with a small spire. It has 5 bells. It was originally built in the 12th century with additions or alterations in the 13th and 15th. It's constructed of limestone rubble and it has a plain tile roof. The chancel and the nave were rebuilt in 1854 after being redesigned by a Mr. Huddleston. The cost of the rebuild was covered by the Reverend John William King. Now, King is an important name to Ashby de la Launde, as we'll learn shortly. Inside this church, there are several King family memorials. For example, there were portions of a Jacobean monument to Edward King and his wives Mary and Elizabeth in the chancel, but their kneeling effigies are now placed on a ledge in the north wall. Opposite are those of their daughters, Mary, Anne and Elizabeth, and of a baby in a cradle representing Amy, a 4th daughter of Edward King by his 2nd wife. On the chancel arch is a small slab inscribed to Edward King and his family, and below it are the remains of 4 Latin lines, which translate to "He restored the church in 1605. There were 2 monuments in here commemorating Simon and Isabel de la Launde, one of which remained in the north part of the nave until that restoration in 1854. Yeah, no such issues getting into this churchyard. It's very simple. You just walk straight down Church Avenue and you can't miss the gates. They're right in front of you. And we are now going to turn around and head back through those gates, actually, which you can see right there. And back up Church Avenue towards the village hall. Now, this is a very interesting building, and you'll see why in a second. At the other end of the lane, which runs down to the church, is Ashby Village Hall. Now, keep this building in mind for later because it forms part of the story behind the 16th century Ashb Hall. This was erected on its present site in the 1950s after being moved from elsewhere in the village. It has a programme of regular events. These include an over-60s club, a book group, a pop-up pub and a wine club. Small it may be, but it helps to keep Ashby's community together. Heading westwards now, the next thing you pass along Main Street is Ashby's water tower, standing tall amongst its leafy backdrop. Although it's a reinforced concrete structure, which, let's be honest, isn't very visually appealing, this does plenty more than just supply water to the village. In addition, it's a useful support for the local broadband transmission. In 2010, residents here were told that high-speed broadband was unlikely to reach Ashby de la Launde in the near future. That prompted them to bring in an external company to lay a fibre optic ring main around the village, and the water tower somehow helped. I don't know how, I'm not a technician. Where the houses end, there's a drinking fountain with a badly weathered inscription. It reads, "Wash thy sin, not thy countenance only." This has been here since at least 1905. Also at the western end of the village is a track that leads to Ashb Hall. As you can see, it's private, but that won't stop us talking about what's up there. Ashby Hall was built in 1595 by the King family using the original Norman manor house as part of its foundations. Its most notable owners were Colonel Edward King, the Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby, and his father-in-law Sir Edward Askew. Colonel King was a strong supporter of Oliver Cromwell and served as a captain in the Parliamentarian Army as well as Governor of Boston during the Commonwealth. Despite his strong Republican and nonconformist beliefs, he's credited as being the first Member of Parliament to call for the restoration of Charles II. Between 1814 and 1835, the hall was used as a girls' school, but the family would retake possession of it soon afterwards. Several other King family members lived at the hall. John William King, a parson and noted racehorse breeder for instance, was owner of Ashby Hall in 1841. In 1874, his filly, Apology, won the Triple Crown of the 1,000 Guineas, the Oaks and the St Leger. You could say he was a pretty successful man when it came to horses. Mind you, his equine activities didn't please everyone. When they came to the attention of Bishop Wordsworth of Lincoln, he demanded King resign from his church position. Ashby Hall remained in the King family until the late 19th century when it passed through the female line to Colonel William Vere Reeve King Fane of Fulbeck. In 1925, he sold it to George Canning, the 4th Baron Garvagh, who sold his Irish estates near Londonderry and moved his family to Ashby Hall. Garvagh rebuilt and modernised parts of the hall and built a large wooden indoor badminton court that was later re-sited. We've actually seen that building already. It became Ashby Village Hall. Lord Garvagh moved to Keswick at the beginning of World War II, and by 1942, various fighter squadrons based at RAF Digby had taken over Ashby Hall as their officers' mess. One of the most notable was the 609 White Rose Squadron. By the end of the war, the house became derelict and stood empty until the estate was broken up in the late 1950s. The park was cleared of its oak trees and the walled garden and surrounding farms were sold separately, leaving the hall itself seemingly on its own. It was to become an entertainment venue called the Lake Rendezvous Club, and acts to perform at it included huge showbiz names like Diana Dawes, Bob Monkhouse and Ken Dodd. In 1960, the hall was purchased by Roy Baines from Ruskington, who renovated parts of the building. He converted it into Ashby Hall Country Club. It could then boast facilities like a nightclub, a swimming pool and a fishing lake, which could also accommodate boating and water skiing. Members paid an annual fee. Baines lived there with his wife June and 3 children until it was sold to the Ward family in the late 1960s, rebranding slightly to Ashby Country Club. The club eventually closed in 1992 and the hall went on to become the headquarters of a defence and security manufacturing company. And that's going to bring us to the end of our walk through Ashby de la Launde, and now you know a bit more about this village and Bloxham and the parish as a whole. But I can't help but feel that this is only part of Ashby's story, because the next parish we're about to cover sort of completes it, and you'll see why tomorrow. So after visiting Ashby de la Launde and Bloxham, it feels like we've completed part 1 of 2. That's because its neighbour holds the key to the rest of its story. As we mentioned earlier, Ashby's history is linked heavily to the Knights Templar, and tomorrow we're off to see where the preceptory was. Join me there, folks, for more here in North Kesteven. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.